Welcome to Recombination Nation. Today, I have Mandy from Incredible Vegetables, the most extraordinary, diverse, and self-admittedly chaotic perennial vegetable nursery situated in the lovely countryside of the UK in England. And I've had a look at her gorgeous website, and I thought I knew a thing or two about plants. I've seen so many things on her list that I'm like, I didn't know that was a thing. And that's really, it's a rare joy for somebody who's been obsessed with plants their whole life to find something like that. So that's why I'm extra excited to talk to Mandy today. So I'll throw over to you, Mandy, and you can tell us a little bit more about your life journey, your path. How did you end up running this amazing nursery? And did you ever think that was going to be in your future?
If you'd asked me 20 years ago, no, I wouldn't have thought that would be my future. I spent a large part of my career as an artist and sort of photographer, sculptor, sort of in the world of fine art, and that life was pretty amazing. And but then I ended up moving to the southwest of England, which has got quite a big sort of regenerative scene and quite progressive, growing projects and things. And I was really lucky enough to buy a share in a piece of land with a small group of people. And so going from a tiny back garden, where you can just grow a few things, to having some experimental space. I mean, that was just a complete luxury and a joy. And that sort of lit the touch paper of like, and it was one perennial vegetable that started this whole whole thing off, as a from igniting an interest to doing a hobby, doing all my own little projects and research, and then being absolutely inundated with requests for plants. So it went from an interest to like people going, "I want that plant. I've heard you're growing that plant," And then what with social media and everything, it's like give the people what they want. They really want the perennial food plants, and I love the plant like you. I absolutely like, obsessed with plants, and
Can I ask what
so
that first plant was? Like
yeah,
what was the
yeah.
turning point? I'm curious.
It's called a perennial nine-star broccoli, which is a really old-fashioned brassica. I mean, it looks more like a cauliflower than a broccoli, but it's like a white sprouting broccoli with a big sort of cauliflower head, and then lots of little satellite florets around the outside, hence the name Nine Star. But sort of 100 years ago, roughly, when it was developed, you could crop it one spring, summer, and then you'd cut it right back, and it would produce for 5 years in a row before finally giving up. And I had some plants which I grew on, and they did actually do the 5-year thing, which was amazing. But that's like a variety that's almost gone extinct because there was so few seeds about. It sort of went through inbreeding depression. So nine-star seed that you'd buy from the last few remaining places was really not true to type. So that sort of had a very special place in my heart. That original planting, and that kind of led me down a perennial brassica avenue that I haven't escaped from since.
Well, I want to start there I love talking about specific plants first. How did you restore this degraded perennial heirloom? Did you have to incorporate like wider genetics from a few different sources? What was that journey like, and how far along has it come?
Well, it's one of my ongoing many plate spinning things that I'm doing, but it was uh, it's probably like 15, 20 years ago. You could still source the seed from multiple companies and some in Europe as well. Um, but yeah, the gene pool and the seed pool had kind of dwindled to nothing. So I managed to get some seed from University of Warwick seed bank. That's amazing. They had seed from like 1982 or something, which was really good to put into a trial because it hadn't had all those successional generations of being inbred. It was probably a few steps back closer to the original material. And then I put a call out for seeds. So I got seeds sent to me in the post. You know, people found seeds down the back of their sofa that they'd had there for a few decades, and I got all these like little packets coming in the post. I think I ended up with about 14 accessions of seed. You know, which you could always do with more, but you know that was a good start.
Did you find much variability in those 14 different strains?
Yeah, complete variability. I mean, some were absolute super specimens, like you know, who were just like, wow, you're like the real thing. Some were like a single brassica stalk with one floret on, you know, on the top. On the top. Some were monsters. Some were somewhere in between. Like huge diversity of what grew out from that, and you know that was like fascinating to see. And that was about 300 plants that I planted up. That was the only space I had, you know, to plant that many. But yeah, amazing variation, and some so basically it was just to scramble them all together in the same space as the first first stage.
Did you apply any taste tests during the selection process? Because often we can select for like the most beautiful looking plants, but if you're not actually
Yeah,
tasting them along the way, you're not getting the best possible end product.
yeah, we did do some taste tests, but also it's such a tricky one to work with because you're this is what becomes apparent when you start a project because you go you don't you know it's like a thing called thinking it through at the beginning. So it was like a massive learning curve because you plant them all out and then you go and then a friend of mine who's you know experienced plant breeder, you know, who's like was helping me. He said, "Oh, you do realize that they might not all flower at the same time?" And I'm like, "What? What do you mean they won't all flower at the same time?" I go, "Oh my God, I hadn't even thought about it." Luckily, they all had a crossover of, you know, flowering time. Um, but yeah, we did do taste tests, but then it's a really tricky one to work with because you can get the first generation of seed. That's the easy part, but then it's like, do you then take out the ones that aren't true to type, but because you're looking at it as a perennial crop, so you want it to be have perennial qualities as well as edible qualities, as long as you know how many years you're going to get out of it and all those things, and then it gets really complicated as to which avenues you're going to
Well,
go
that
down.
was my next question. Like the extra challenges and possible advantages of breeding perennials versus annuals. Because I would imagine you would have to leave that test planting for multiple years to find
Yeah,
out if they actually lasted like they were, you know, like it said on the label. Does that give extra opportunities to cull over those generations? So like the seed of the plants that are left in the fourth year could be much more narrowly focused on like the absolute best performing, like maybe three strains. And but in the first year, you can just let everything flower to capture any genetics that's in the mix.
yeah, I think um, like the first year, let everything flower, and then um, it's really hard to take out plants, but you have to be brutal, don't you? The ones with a single floret on top of a stick, you go like you can't, you don't really want to take those forward, do you? And
Yeah.
that's like quite obvious. But it's a really tricky project because um, like with limited resources. I mean, I'm a person like who's like full of fire and ideas, you know, and I just like start off on something and then it's like how are you going to manage like 300 huge, you know, brassicas, cut, you know, they'd have to be cut back multiple times over the spring if you were going to try and see if they were going to do their floret producing the following, you know, the following year. It's like it's actually more than one person can do. So that's all of these things like need sort of like a team of people to dedicate themselves to that crop, and also um, you have to think about because I was doing it on a shared site. You know, basically, you had to kill off everyone else's brassicas while I was doing the project, which they weren't very happy about. I was like chopping off Brussels sprouts and other flowering brassicas again. Like they can't be here this time of year, and that didn't go down too well. So like there's also the problem of finding a isolated site big enough to do. to do that on. But that's all part of the learning process, and it shouldn't stop you following a crop because of those challenges and things. But
Have you managed to convince any of those people growing other brassicas that the perennial broccoli is actually superior, and have some of them converted over?
I think one or two of them were like, "Oh wow, that's interesting," but it's still hard to come up against all the traditional crops, that would just harvest, take it out, do it all again. That's the thing about some of the plants I grow. It's like educating and tasting these things. Many of which are really really old fashioned crops. It's not like we're bringing new things into the scene. They're like it's like a resurrection of old crops. But people are not everyone, but wary of what something's going to taste like. It doesn't look familiar, and all of those things, or they don't want to give up the space for that long. So it's
I have another interesting question. Did the top performing varieties in that trial vary from year to year, as you had like a wet year and a hot year, and sometimes there'd be more pests than others? Do you sometimes need those variability, that variation in seasons to actually get the full sense of what that strain is capable of doing?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, you'd leave it for like as long as possible. I mean, that was just a short trial, unfortunately, because the constraints of the site, I couldn't see it through to like the full 5 years, which
Mm.
which I would have wanted to do. But what I did was like collected the seed, um, and then I've given that out, because it's not a commercial project. It was just trying to not lose the species kind of thing. And so the seed has just gone out to other growers who are interested in it. So they're like hopefully taking forward new generations of it, because I can't personally look after that many brassicas on my own every year when I tell you about all the other things I'm looking after. So it was a bit of a kind of passionate push on a crop, and then going, oh my God, I don't know how I'm gonna. I haven't got the resources to take it forward all these other stages, but like I've given out as much of the seed as I can for those who are interested in the crop, and I've still got some staved in long-term storage, which can, it's still germinating really well. I germinate and test it, and it's still germinating really well. So.
Do you think the lesson of this crop, of it nearly being lost and requiring this heroic effort to bring it back into its full glory, does it feel like that story has resonated with the wider growing community, and people are going to be more careful about letting things like that slip through their fingers in the future?
I think the people who are like-minded, spirits who know about the loss. If you don't know about a plant in the first place, you're not going to be sad that it's gone, because you didn't even know it existed. So it's more in the community of people that are interested in heirloom and heritage and perennial crops. Of course, they know and care about it, and there's we can come on to later, like the networks of people that we're all aiding and abetting each
Mm.
other of the
Hmm.
different crops. It's like a little club that we all belong to. But generally, I think there's a lack of awareness. I mean, I give quite a lot of talks around Britain, and like the plants I talk about, nobody's ever heard of or even grown. I mean, occasionally you get somebody whose grandmother or great grandmother, they remember them using it in the kitchen, like a good King Henry or something. Like,
Mm.
they say, oh, my grandma used to make a good King Henry quiche, and stuff. And you're like, wow, somebody's like, somebody is in living memory of that crop being used. So, but I think it's still a niche area. I have to say, I think.
Well, let's move on. And you've got so many species we could talk about. What's another one that you've done some breeding with? And I'm really interested in this because breeding perennials has different challenges that I don't think as many people talk about compared to
No,
annuals.
well, another crop that I can't say I'm breeding it. I can say that I've been trying to breed it, but it's the Apios americana or the hotness, which is probably one of my favourite perennials. Just because it's so exquisitely beautiful when the vines are climbing and the flowers set the beautiful scented flowers, but it's such an underutilized source of vegetable protein. I mean, it's just ridiculous that it's not, I need like thousands of pounds to help with this. But so it's a labor of love, and I was very fortunate to be given a very, very rare collection of Apios. So there's about 42 accessions
Wow.
with and that is the most diverse collection anywhere, probably. I mean, they were gathered. The person who gifted, I mean, some of them I've collected myself from various places, but the person who gifted them to me had been kind of working with them for a long, long time. So they'd been gathered over quite a few decades, and some of them had come from Apios improvement programs and things like that. So it's a very, very rare collection. Um, so they they um, so part of my role is to kind of keep the collection alive. So it's like vegetatively, making sure the tubers are gathered every year, like keeping all the varieties completely distinct, which is no small task. So they're
Mm.
all in really large containers because they're with massive signs painted in white paint. So it'd be so easy for the tubers to intermingle with their creeping habits. So they've got their own security barrier around each pot, so I don't muddle up the varieties. And then the challenge has been, this is what I've been doing for about the last eight eight years or something. It's like trying to, the only way you can breed with them is to get them to produce, obviously get them to produce seed pods. So you could look at the traits of, they're so diverse, because one variety might have really huge, almost tennis ball sized tubers, but will only make, a few tubers per container, whereas another one will have way smaller tubers, but like absolutely prolific, like hundreds and hundreds. Some of the vines are really vigorous, and the vines can be used as for fodder. They're full of protein and minerals and everything. So in the ideal scenario, you would be looking at all the traits of the best, maybe vigorous producers, decent sized tubers that aren't fiddly to prepare, and then work with a couple of those lines. But so the last 8 years, I've been spending my evenings in the summer like tweezering open Apios flowers in the attempt to get insects to because the flowers need to be tripped open for insects to access the flowers. So, and I think as far as I know, the only insect that can do that in the UK is like a leaf cutter bee. It's like the only the right weight and anatomy to trip open the flowers. And they even though I put a sign up, outside the polytunnel going, leaf cutter bees, come this way, help help the progress of the vegetable protein project. None of them were tripped. I didn't have the right insects, so I was like a mad woman in there with like tweezers trying to tweeze open millions and millions and millions of Apios flowers. And like once they're tripped open, the hope is that the insects can come and any insect can then come and help set seed pods. But the elusive Apios seed pod is still a thing of mystery and wonder, because I've been trying for like 8 years and I haven't had a single seed pod so far.
Interesting. Have you considered, or is there a method for manually doing that final part of the cross-pollination, or is the mechanism too delicate?
I think you probably, if you could narrow it down to um, like just say pick two to work with, you could probably do that on a really small on a small scale,
Mm.
um, you could do that. I think I was trying to do it from like a bigger scale, like just to try and kind of prove that you could actually set seed pods, in the UK, because that's would really be a really good starting point. Because I know in the States, um, people people that are growing Apios or the ones that they come across in the wild have no problem setting
Mm.
seed pods.
I
Obviously,
wonder
some.
if that could be an advantage. You often see crops in their like origin country, like the US for Apios. Um, there's some advantages for breeding, but there's disadvantages as well. So your
Yeah.
lack of natural pollinators could actually give you more control over how the pollination happens, and it could open up a completely different program.
And also some of the Apios accessions, some of them actually lost the ability to produce pods
Mm.
naturally because I think it's the more northern varieties um, ended up being only vegetatively propagated. Even in the wild, they lost their ability to
Yeah, I
set
think that they're
set.
triploids, aren't they? Which means they're
Yeah,
probably a hybrid between some
yeah,
other populations.
yeah.
Have you looked at
So
any other Apios species to like bring into the mix? Sometimes that can really shake things up.
there are others. There are. I think it's like Fortunae. I think is another one. But trying to get your hands on that material is just not. I just haven't
Mm.
found it possible. As there's been glimmers of hope here and there when people have got. I think, but they're generally people that have got one tuber and they're not going to let it go. They're not going to let it go. They're like So yeah, it's really difficult. So um, so I'm going to keep trying with that crop, but in the background, it's like another important part of what I do is like even if I haven't managed to breed it as such, I'm still conserving that collection year on year, and that's like that this is why it's so like such a fragile thing when it's relying on a tiny group of people because
Mm.
if I like fall over and break my leg, like that's 42 accessions of Apios, gift for humanity of like amazing diverse gene pool of material. Like that's down to like one person looking after it. And that's so I actually taken steps to up at the University of Aberdeen, they're actually doing research into um, perennial like vegetable proteins and especially perennial legumes. So we mirrored the collection up there. Like I sent them the whole collection so that we're operating it from two places,
Mm.
so that if either of us lose one of them, that we can still hope to keep the collection
Yeah,
intact.
it's definitely a logistical hurdle to maintain those large, diverse collections and keep everything separate and labeled and uh, sorted. It's not a trivial effort. Um, Oh, I have a question too. Is it getting more difficult over time in the UK to bring in this kind of diversity of crops? I know in Australia our import quarantine laws have gotten more and more strict over time, and I wonder if you're facing a similar challenge in the UK.
Yeah, Brexit is just an absolute nightmare because it's just it just makes you want to cry because there's like European, there's loads of really amazing agroforestry and projects and places that sell rare seeds. Especially in like the Netherlands and Germany, I used to source a lot of stuff from there. But then as a if you're a big importer, then of course you can get all the paperwork and all the phytosanitary stuff. But as a small scale grower, that kind of cuts off so much, exchange of plant material or seeds, and that doesn't help anybody.
Mm, mm.
I just think like the government here has just completely got its head in the sand, about food security. They should be supporting channels of exchange of seeds and plant materials if it's for, the wider benefit for people. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's talk about another crop. We have to at least talk about three of them. I would talk
yeah,
probably for hours on every
yeah,
single
yeah.
thing in your collection.
Well, there's another really interesting crop. Um, well, there's so many, but like skirret, which is a like a perennial root vegetable, which I've been working with for quite some time, and it's this is one of the easier ones because it can be propagated by seed and by vegetable divisions. So that's actually an easier one to take forward because you can lift everything when it's dormant, visually see what kind of roots you've got. So there's quite a few people in the UK working with skirret as a root crop, and so you can do your selection fairly easily with those. On depending on root size. Some of them have a woody core, so you're also looking at be ideal if you didn't have a woody core in them,
Mm.
and like generally larger root size that makes it more usable in the kitchen, sort of thing.
Does Skirret have a really unique flavor that gives it appeal for like gourmet restaurants? It's something really distinct and unique.
It's just a really sweet tasting, somewhere between like a carrot and a parsnip, and you know, traditionally like in like Tudor and Stuart periods, when sugar was scarce, it was like a sweetener, in pies, and it could definitely be on the menu in some Michelin star restaurants. um, but it's one of those crops that convenience overrides the use of the crop. Like give someone a round potato or a gnarly old bunch of skirret roots, they're going to like choose a potato. And it's like, why? Dig up like a muddy clump of you know tangled roots and go like 3 hours later, like you've got your dinner on the table. But then most people wouldn't have experienced the flavor and what you can do with it. And there's also a little bit of flurry of excitement about pink rooted skirret, which is almost got like the same tinge of a pink beetroot on the skin. So that's like caused a bit of a stir, and also that somehow makes them more appealing as a vegetable. That just hint of color,
Mm.
because you're talking about gnarly beige skinny roots. It looks like you've dug up the flowering herbaceous perennial or something, and it's like when they're prepared, you can just eat them just like any other root vegetable. But so like the idea with the skillet is like just to kind of keep looking at how you could make them more usable in the kitchen, like getting rid of the woody woody core, and then possibly breeding this like the pink rooted one, and maybe even eventually you could have like orange, pink, and white skillet all at the
You,
same time.
you only have to look at the history of the domestication of the carrot to see the potential. Like it didn't start out as big and as orange and as sweet as we take for granted today.
But these are the fantastic thing about skillet is like it's so unfussy. This is one of the advantages of like working with perennial crops, because if you started messing around with annual roots and things, they're it's like the skillet. They can just be lifted, divided, pushed back into the ground, and then they still carry on doing their thing. They'll still flower and produce seed next year. A tiny fragment will give you another population sort of thing. So they're that kind of longevity and ability to be resilient gives you like a lot of options when you're
Uh,
working with that plant
my
material.
good friend and former guest Philan asked me your opinion on silverweed because that's his little obsession. Have you and you also asked how the plants that he sent you are going.
Yeah, I've got a few on the go. I'm just a bit wary because of the spaces that I'm growing in are shared spaces. I know it can become like um, I'm slightly nervous of like growing it in spaces where it might t take off,
Yeah, yeah.
um, and that aren't necessarily like if it was just my own space without worrying about other people's areas, then I would. I don't know if there's a way of growing it without it kind of like self-sowing too much. I think it needs to be grown in a more controlled situation.
Well, on that note, do you have any thoughts about the challenge of breeding perennials when you want to get rid of a plant that you don't want to breed from, and you might suddenly find that you've got hundreds of that particular plant, and you're like, I want them all gone. Um, and whereas with an annual crop, when they're finished, they just wind up, and there's kind of a more natural endpoint to that process. So, have you come up with any tricks and strategies for that challenge?
Well, I kind of learned the hard way. I mean, I've made some terrible mistakes, and like especially with the Apios, like I've got the collection which are all safely ensconced in containers, with like matting underneath, so they're not going to intermingle or escape. But I stupidly or not stupidly planted a whole one. Just it was just one type in a multi-span of the polytunnel with 12-foot high supports and drip irrigation. Of course, they just like thought it was all their Christmases come up, like compared to how they behave outside in a weedy space and compared to what they actually did when I put them in that tunnel, and they went absolutely out of control. And this is on like rented farm
Oh no.
farmland. I mean, the good thing was like you go, well, yeah, this could really be a viable commercial crop, because they were literally going nuts.
Yeah, you
Like,
need that vigor, particularly in staple crops. If you want them to perform and to rely on them, you need that vigor.
yeah, well, they definitely performed, and then they completely went off piste. They were like going like outside the tunnel into the neighboring, and like I went, oh my God, like what have I done? And I had to hire a team of people. I mean, I was crying through most of this. I mean, I can laugh about it now, but I had to hire a team of people, and because the ground had been it was a tunnel that I'd taken on that had been used for annual production. Of course, the soil was really free flowing. It'd been tilled, before I took it on. It's completely no dig now, but so of course the tubers just had free, loose soil like water on tap, and so I hired like five people, and we sort of turned ourselves into this human mole machine, like tunnel the way along to get them all out. And even now, like the tendrils still popping up, hit. We got most of them out, but they went down way deeper than an Apios crop
Mm.
would normally go. But the the really upside of this story, which is a freaky thing that happened, but it was like I ended up with probably like 70 kilos of ground nuts, which was a good thing to come out of the horrendous experiment. And then my friend who's got a forest garden in Devon, I said, "Do you want 70 kilos of ground nuts?" And he goes, "Yeah, yeah, we need more vegetable protein. We've got tons of stuff, but we're not on it on the veg." And he designed these amazing collapsible, which is what I should have done in the first place, huge circular collapsible raised beds. So you just pull a string, the sides fold down, and then there's your
Ah.
mountain of tubers in the middle.
Aha.
And so it's a way of growing them on for 2 or 3 years, and then you can actually just kind of take the sides down, harvest, and then refill and hold. So anyway, he did that. That worked spectacularly, and in turn, that's led to a whole commercial Apios project in North Devon after they visited my friend and went, wow, that's an amazing idea. So now another load of tubers have gone up to North Devon, and they're producing avenues of apios in this circular high bed design, which kind of keeps them from marauding about, but also gives them enough space to get hopefully a yield that's worth using for the restaurants they supply and things like that. So
Do you suspect do you suspect that in the right circumstances, livestock could be used to do that cleanup, like particularly for tuber crops. And I'm thinking pigs could be in production systems when you want to rotate out of that perennial, that a period of time under pigs, because they will sniff every tuber out and go looking for it.
yeah, I mean that would be a great idea for something like that. We know where they have to root down and get stuff out. Yeah, I mean that would be an easier way of doing it, and also probably you'd get some fertility from the animals you know, being on there. So yeah, that would definitely, that's one of the downsides of the perennial. They some of them can be very overzealous and very persistent. So if you have put them in the wrong place, which I have done many times, you have to rectify. It's not a mistake exactly, but you can create a lot of work if you but also it depends on the situation. In one situation they'll be very slow growing, slow moving. In another situation, they can just be completely rampant. So it depends on what competition there is around and stuff.
Do you have any general advice for people to reduce the number of mistakes with perennials, of like putting them in places to like maybe the wrong place or the wrong scale for what they can manage?
I just think like do your research first. I mean, when I send out plants, I impart what I've learned, like get like a full A4 instruction sheet of what to do and what not to do. Like I think it's only fair to warn people, like if something's got like a really like maniac rhizome creeping habit, you don't want to put that in the middle of your raised beds with lettuces or something.
Hmm.
Like you just give people pointers.
I'm
I
thinking
would
of the
say
guy who sold the Mogwai in the movie Gremlins. It's like these are the rules you have to follow if you don't want to get into trouble.
well, I think it's just knowledge is everything, isn't it? And like if somebody else has messed it up, like listen, just listen to the advice. It also depends on what kind of land you've got. If you've got a huge piece of land, then a big drift of a plant isn't going to be a problem. But if you're working planting up a really small garden, you don't want something you just don't want one crop that's going to hog the whole
Hmm.
space, and you don't have a diversity of other things to harvest. So.
Or make the neighbors furious with you.
Yeah, like bamboo.
Oh yes, yeah, yeah, I know that well here in the subtropics. Um, I'm really curious about vegetables that you have discovered and loved that are in unusual plant families that you don't normally think of as being edible. Do any of those come to mind?
Um, I really like Japanese and Korean plants. So I grow um like the Korean aster, but which is a beautiful flowering plant, but used as a used as a spring vegetable, and various nettles. I grow like two different kinds of Japanese nettles, which can be used as a spinach alternative. There's lots and lots of edible ornamentals, that I work with. Um, so that's another hard one to push. Like Sochan, like the Rudbeckia laciniata. That's a hard one to push, although it's like an important, native foodstuffs, like particularly like Cherokee cuisine, like um, encouraging people to eat Rudbeckias is quite hard. Although there is interest, is interest in like what's not to love. A resilient green that you can harvest in spring and again in the autumn. In the autumn, so it's all about encouraging people to try it, to try them.
And did I see, or did somebody suggest I ask about what is it, Coccinia abyssinica? It's a cucurbit,
Yeah,
but it's got a tuber that you eat rather than the fruit. Were you working with that?
yeah. Another one of my many, many things. Yeah, I did grow it. I mean, the tuber part is, they can grow quite hefty, so quite hefty size. There's like a starchy root that you can cook up, and I've even had them survive. I grew them on in undercover, and I got fruits, and I saved some seeds from them. But even the tubers themselves are much hardier than you think. I mean, I've had them surviving in a bucket outdoors all winter, and then they still sprout the following spring, and they're really drought tolerant crop. So they're definitely one for they're on the back burner at the moment, but they'll probably get another resurrection in my in the future because I've got seeds saved. But it's definitely a drought tolerant root crop that we could really come into play from what after the last the summer we've just been through here. But
I almost imagine, like, I look back on the enormous impact that the potato had on the British Isles when it was introduced. It was so transformative of agriculture, but then because it was just one crop and a very limited number of strains, it set things up for disaster when the blight finally caught up with it. But I almost wonder if in the future a greater diversity of crops like the potato from all over the world could be a really important tool for your community adapting to the future challenges, that you have all of these other options to explore as a local food system. Do you have any thoughts on that front? Is that kind of what you're working towards?
I just think diversity is the key to everything, isn't it? Because it's like not putting all your eggs in one basket,
Mm.
and small harvests of a lot of different things is better than no harvest of one big crop. And I just think like multiple layers of edible plants grown in a space together gives you way more options. I think part of what I'm doing is testing and observing. That's a big part of what I do, even though I might have all these avenues that don't get very far. It's still really valuable to see if you're growing, say, like I sort of based on the edge of Dartmoor, which is sort of fairly high elevation. It's a mild climate in the southwest of England, but I'm growing stuff at height as well. But it's part of the work is like planting perennials. I mean, it's invaluable to see how something can survive for like 10 to 15 years. Like that's important. That's important as well to seeing what makes it and what doesn't, and what you could have going forwards into a food system.
It definitely takes that amount of time to put the crops through all of the extremes, like the hottest year and the wettest year and the
Yeah.
coldest year. They are not going to turn up at the same time, and you won't know the limits of tolerance of a crop until you've had it around for a long time. So I really appreciate that you. I really want to highlight that you're doing that. The other thing I'd point out too is to look at the homeland of the potato. Like in Peru, they grow dozens of really diverse tuber crops at all sorts of different altitudes and soils, and from all different plant families. And I think there's a real lesson in that. I wanted to probably the final crop we talk about. You seem to work a fair bit with plantago or plantains, not the banana plantains. If you, it's a synonym, unfortunate synonym, but the ribworts. And do you see them as having more potential for development as a leaf vegetable and maybe as a seed crop as well too? Because I think they do have edible seeds.
The sea plantain is really really delicious. Like it's amazing how delicious it is, and like that could easily become like a common vegetable, or you know used in restaurants. I mean it's got that really lovely crunchy salty taste, and as long as it's grown in well drained conditions, it will grow in normal sort of loamy soil. It doesn't like to be kind of waterlogged or anything. that's one of the ones I grow, and then the red plantain, which again is like a beautiful ornamental plant, but that could be used in place of like a radicchio or something in the spring, and then the bigger leaves are a bit tougher to eat. They would need to be cooked, but they're all things that could be go into a diverse mix. You know, they're not necessarily plants that you want to eat a whole bowl full on its own, but they're all ingredients for like a bigger salad of things. You know, that's one of the things I'm really interested in is like a perennial salad, perennial resilient salad mix of unusual things, which you're cutting them as they appear. They have a kind of self-perpetuating life cycle. Some of them are seeding themselves, some of them are popping up as herbaceous perennials, but you just have this self um, like a bed that can just perpetuate itself without too much intervention, and you just leave it, and then you just cut the top off, and whatever comes in that salad is what your salad is. You just leave it to its own devices.
Mm. Do you think perennial crops have a huge advantage for home gardeners on that front? Like a lot of annuals, particularly the genetics of annuals that's available to home gardeners, they're market garden varieties that are bred to grow really fast under perfect conditions and produce all at once. And you'll often end up with a flood of produce in the kitchen that's more than you can actually use. Whereas what a home grower wants is like just a little bit every day to add to whatever they're cooking. And I think perennials, do you think perennials are generally better at doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the plants that I send out is almost like a kit that you could you could adopt. You know, you obviously might not be able to put all of it in, but like a little grouping of food plants. You know, so like you could um, it's like having a like little permanent larder in your back garden. You know, so there's some perennial onions. Like you, you can go and snip some of those off. There's a like a perennial wall rocket, which there's an olive leaf perennial wall rocket, which they're sort of going in year three now, and then you just keep cutting them back. You know, it's like who doesn't want like to be able to pick rocket, for 3 years or longer without having to sow it and nurse them through their seedling stage. These are kind of woody stemmed rockets, which like it's not just about taking the work out of annual trying to produce annually. I mean, that is a lot of work, although it can be rewarding. But it's also having some home built resilience as well to access to small amounts of food that can be in permanence. That gives you a kind of feeling of like some food security and resilience, I think.
Do you also find these wilder uh, perennial crops you use them in smaller quantities because they have more intensive flavors often. They're kind of more medicinal. They're a bit more like herbs than vegetables, and that's kind of a sliding scale. And I mean, I'd maybe point to the history of lettuce that it started out as a medicinal herb. Like people would use
Yeah,
the latex in the flowers to like treat headaches and things. And then gradually it got bred to like a bigger, blander, bulkier kind of thing that we're, like an iceberg lettuce that we think of today is so
yeah,
far from where it started. And I don't
yeah.
know, like I look at all of these really diverse, perennial, mostly unimproved in inverted commas crops, that they're further back in that evolution.
Yeah, they're definitely further back. I mean, some are like haven't undergone any kind of breeding or selection whatsoever. So I think that there's a lot of bitterness. We've sort of learned to breed bitterness out of everything, even though if it's prepared in the right way, it can actually be an amazing flavor in the scheme of things. But with sort of a lot of annual crop breeding is like going, well, take that out, but that might be the medicinal compound attached to that bitterness that's like really amazing,
Mm.
amazing for you. Um, but yeah, they are strong tastes, that can be like off-putting, but then it's like learning how to work with them in the kitchen that makes them, like good King Henry leaves. I mean, you wouldn't want to eat those raw because they're like be in green sandpaper. But like if you soak them in salt water, which was the traditional way, that takes the bitterness out. You squeeze them out, and then you can just chop them up and then cook them and use them like spinach. So it's knowing how to prepare things also
Mm.
that really help you use them in the kitchen. And I am working with a wild lettuce, like a Lactuca perennis, which is like a wild mountain lettuce. And I've got a few. That's another little project. I've got about eight accessions of those, and that's all to do with there's a big variation in taste. I've got one that's really mild, which I'm going to carry forward. It's the leaves taste amazing on it, and then it's like that might be the best tasting one, but then it's although they're really hardy, it's like quite hard to get them to resurrect themselves. They're herbaceous perennials, so some made it and some didn't. So like need to look at the conditions of why some didn't make it and some came back for another year.
Well, that brings up my next point. Like, I think if I'm reading your biography correctly, you were a collector first, and then breeding certain crops kind of emerged from that spontaneously. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on like the strategy in doing crop breeding. Some people just pick one crop and they're like absolutely determined to brute force it into some new form that they're excited about. And other people like you kind of grow a bit of everything. And I think you're more like open and receptive to the plants, indicating if they like your conditions and if they have something of interest that kind of makes you want to work further with them. So, what are your thoughts and advice on that for people who are interested in getting into crop breeding?
I think like I don't come at it from any kind of scientific angle whatsoever, but it's more like a little thing in the back of my mind about what if this was the thing, that like it like the reason I do all of this is because I really care about the planet, and I really care about things not going extinct, but I also care about food security, and it's like little parts of me go, if I explored this, maybe this could be the key thing that is a pivotal crop, for the future. Like it could have massive impact for the future. So part of it is like feeling so strongly about it that you have feel compelled, to explore. Um, and but also working with the plants, they work on us, don't they, all the time. So it's like when you see something that is a kind of surprise from something that you're growing, you feel compelled, that you have to take that forward, because lots of amazing combinations and accidents happen, don't they, when you're growing hundreds and hundreds of plants
Well, I mean,
together.
that's the
Yeah.
proven strategy for like the last, however many thousand years of
Yeah.
agriculture. It's mostly been spontaneous surprises
Yeah.
combined with people who are paying attention. That's the key ingredient. It's not necessarily like, I mean, I think there's a lot of power in like hand crossing and deliberate interventions and getting in the mix, but also just leaving space for things to surprise you and to noticing that has a lot of power as well.
I know. I mean, I've got loads and loads of I've got a lot of different perennial brassicas growing, and some of them are ones that never flower, and some flower periodically, and then you can cut them back. They'll carry on producing for another year. But then I sort of used to be more observant about what was going on. But then since I've left them all to do just their wild thing in the space, I just noticed the other day that there were these brassicas growing, which are obviously some self-sown combination of things, which is like it's produced this other kind of brassica that I haven't seen before. But then it's like, well, let's just see what that one does. Maybe that's like a a non-flowering, perennial brassica. But you can see from the leaf shapes that is a combination of something that I've been growing on the field, and then that's been allowed to just kind of develop itself. But then if there's one that I looked at and I go, well, you've actually been there for 5 years now, then that's one that I would go, wow, this is definitely one that's worth um, taking cuttings from and seeing what it does down the line. But
Mm.
I basically got too many things on the go, so like everything gets a bit of attention. And like another legume that I'm growing is earth nut pea, Lathyrus tuberosus, which it's another really important legume vegetable protein crop that doesn't get enough attention. And I think people don't realize like the length of time it takes to work with a crop. I mean, I've been trying to produce seeds for about 10 years now for that crop, and this year I finally got my first handful of seeds,
Oh,
which was
brilliant.
like a major achievement. And it's like I ditched that, quite a few times. That one, it's just like it's too difficult, and the plants get overgrown. And I thought, no, I'm going to have another go. And I found a packet of pre-Brexit um, earth nut pea seeds that I'd forgotten about, and they all they're about 8 years old. They all germinated amazingly, so I've got like another generation to work with, and that will hopefully be an easier one to work on the tuber size and everything. Now I've got seeds to work with. I can start to grow those
I'd be
and
really
see what.
curious as well. I think often once you get that first generation of pollination in under local conditions and then growing out the seedlings, something changes in the plants. Often they kind of it gives them a chance to figure out the local conditions and change how they
Yeah,
grow. So yeah, I'll have to check in on you again with that in the future. Now, I'm also interested. I mean, this is the original name of the show was Zero Input Agriculture before I rebranded it, but I'm really interested in your thoughts on lowering inputs and those kind of dependencies and the opportunities for working with perennial crops rather than annuals on that front.
yeah. I mean, my original like perennial growing area, that's just been planted and planted and planted in a very sort of topsy-turvy way. I mean, but there's no bare soil in there, and there's no inputs. No, there's no inputs go in there at all. It's basically the plants and their materials are what goes back into the soil. I mean, there's occasional like a well rotted wood chip mulch or something like that around a newly planted shrub or tree, but the perennial garden, which is about 15 years old now, um, it's self-sustaining. It doesn't have anything added to it whatsoever. The plants they just push through everything. They're like robust and really well established. And I sort of think, well, why step in when they're doing a really good job themselves? Like I don't need to actually do anything in there.
Do you suspect there's something about the standard story of fertility and fertilizers that doesn't quite match how diverse, thriving, locally adapted communities of plants actually function? That this idea that you just have to like pour all these chemicals on in whatever form, whether it's synthetic or organic, to like make the crop grow. Do you suspect there's like we're missing something there, that it's an oversimplified story?
I think like that sort of comes from trying to apply industrial agriculture to like smaller spaces, like you're trying to mimic what's done on a 10-acre field to your garden. And um and and I think there's something about the jostling of plants together is like, although it might seem counterintuitive because we've been brought up to put things, in straight rows, and like we manicure everything around them, we reduce the competition, um, we nurture this seedling, and that's like kind of, almost feel like it's a process of eradication. It's like built on eradication rather than proliferation. And I actually feel like the beauty of perennials is that they can all jostle and push through and survive without the need. I mean, you have to gently step in when something's completely getting engulfed or something, but it's a much more gentle process, and they're like sorting themselves out. And I think it goes against the standard thinking that you've got to have space around everything. You can't have two or three things together in the same space. But I've seen the plants absolutely thrive like that. and like the thing about when I give talks, some people go, well, what about the perennial brassicas? Don't you have to rotate them? What happens? What happens when they're in the ground for 10 years? Oh my God. And I'm like, well, you don't go to a forest and start rotating the trees. Like you just, this is say like a monster Taunton Dean kale, which is more like a shrub than a brassica, but it's like they put it in the ground, it lives its life, it's happy. You don't have to like rip it out the ground every 2 years. It's something, I don't know all the science about it, but it's something to do with, if you think of what's going on below ground as well as above ground, there's that whole community of long-lived roots and activity going on, which is completely taken away every time you're preparing the ground for an annual crop. So I think that's where the fertility and the things that the plants enjoy, all of that's going on undisturbed. And we're like, as humans, we're the best at disturbing everything. And it's like best just to leave it alone. Just leave it alone, and it's all right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love that answer. Now, we should take some time to talk about like how you connect with everyone around you, particularly running a nursery. But the thing that caught my ear before was you mentioned that the land that you're on came from a land share, and that's a really interesting opportunity because so many young people these days are priced out of access to land. How did that work for you? If you don't mind talking a little bit about it.
No, well, I've got two spaces. So there's the original field, which was bought as a group, and then I just up the road I rent the space where my nursery is. But the original piece of land where everything started was a group of us, about eight of us. We didn't know each other very well, but we all wanted a growing space. So a piece of land came up for sale very close to the town where we all lived, which was a very rarity. Like land on Dartmoor is like, you know, super pricey and very precious. And there's a lot of big landowners who just own huge parcels of it. And we saw this piece come up, and then we just went, let's put our money in a pool, in a pot. Not, we didn't all have the equal amounts or anything, but we just went, who's got what, and just put it in a pot and then bid on the land. And we're fortunate enough to get it because we had the buying power of the group, and none of us individually would have been able to afford that parcel of land. So we had to take a punt on it that we could do this and work together, and give each other freedom to do what we wanted to do, because we all had different ideas of what we wanted to do. But that was like 15 years ago, so it's still running now. So
Wow. Did you tap into any legal frameworks to kind of set that up? Were there other examples that you could like try to imitate or learn from?
we basically set up a limited company, so that was the entity that owned the land, kind of thing, and then we all got had shares. So that's the model that you own so many shares in the land as a whole. And then over time, people who invested more have been bought back out by people who invested less, so that trying to even up the shares equally. So we're all kind of equals in what stake we have in it.
Interesting. And how do you manage the access and use of the land between you? I'm really curious to like how does that kind of presumably there'd be some conflicts at times, but how does that all work? It's fascinating.
There's a lot of meetings involved, and there are very different ideas about what vegetable growing should be. And I know that my space is like very wild and unruly, and but it's an experimental space that doesn't always go down well with somebody who's next to me who's trying to do very conventional. I mean, it's all organic and um, you know, pesticide free. That's the agreement from the beginning. Like everything's done organically, but the methods of production vary, vary a lot, and that can cause difficulties when one person is trying to grow something in one way, and then the reason why I ended up at a different site for the nursery was that that would be a step too far to like bring all of that into what essentially was going to be a domestic, space for
Mm.
growing rather than. So that's why I kind of took the nursery to another site where I've got the infrastructure to do that. So
And I believe you said that's rented rather than bought. Did you like what's been the strategic payoff with that? Because I think a lot of people assume you have to buy land to do farming, but I think people underestimate the opportunities and the benefits of renting instead.
I think the amazing thing is that a certain lot part of the infrastructure gets looked after for you. Like the water is sorted, the irrigate, power. Like some of the tunnels I put up myself, so I own the tunnels, even though I don't own the land. But like one of the bigger tunnels is on a rental agreement, so that will get maintained every few years. So and cost wise, rental wise, it's actually fairly low cost in terms of what income you can make from it. So I think the payoff is really really good. I've got like really reasonable rent charges, and then I can produce a lot, from those spaces. So um,
Interesting, interesting. Have you seen other people in the UK like imitate your strategy of getting a group of people together to buy land collectively?
um, we get quite a few. We have like an open um, sort of weekend once or twice a year, and then we take people around to say, look, this was a piece of sheep pasture, and this is what we've done in 15 years, and then we tell them about how we structured it and all of that. So we get groups of people who are looking to do similar things, um, just so they can see what's involved. And I mean, there's lots of different models, cooperative models and things, but it's a way of like feeling like it is possible if you can find a group of people, um, especially with the cost of land. Like if you can do it as a group, then you've got it's actually feasible that you could access the land as a group.
Mm, mm. I'm also curious about your business itself and how it works as, I guess you're kind of like a niche that you've kind of like, do you have a lot of competition from other people selling similar kinds of plants, or have you kind of arrived at exactly the right time for this to be your speciality?
I think there's only been up till now. There's only been a handful of places in the UK that sell um, the plants that I do. I think that's increasing now. There's like new nurseries popping up, but we don't all sell the same absolutely identical sets of plants. And I can't supply everything to the UK. It's absolutely impossible. So there's scope for multiple people to take it on board, and then between us we could supply everything you'd need for like a resilient food forest or perennial project. So yeah, like I've been there on the front line, and that's what's meant the demand has been so huge, and it's been impossible to keep up with because I
Yeah.
can only grow so many thousand plants in a year. I mean, I have to go to sleep at night and things.
Um, does the market for perennial vegetables go through cycles of fashions and fads where like there's a famous article on one particular plant and suddenly everyone is like baying for it?
Yeah, definitely. Like there was somebody put something about Skirit on YouTube, and then there was a I remember like the Experimental Farm Network in the States posted something on Facebook going, something weird is happening like Skirit, like we never usually sell all our Skirit seed. And he was like getting like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of orders of Skirit seed. And I went, yeah, like my web shop just melted with Skirit seeds. So some guy had posted something online about the medieval benefits of Skirit. But then there was also like a BBC gardening program, and they mentioned the giant Korean celery, which is not a well-known plant at all. I mean, I grow it as an edible plant, but they were showing it as an ornamental for the garden, and that. I was sat at home and my phone was going ping, 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 ping. Like it's like 50 packets of Korean celery straight, in 2 minutes or something. I'm going, nobody really wants this plant that much, but that was just a little mention, and I'm probably only one of two suppliers of that seed in the country. So that was like fulfilling a need for that particular plant. So
Do, do you have any advice for people who are considering starting their own nursery business, based on what you've been through?
I would say, do it in manageable chunks, and but um, you really need the infrastructure to be set up well, in terms of how you're going to irrigate things, and you know, it's taken me years and years to try and get a system of production. Um, so you,
Did you learn
I,
from other nurseries or did you figure it out on your own?
I just figured it out on my own. Although I am up just up the road from Martin Crawford, the Agroforestry Research Trust, and um, I'm good friends with Martin, and he's like helped me out with layouts of things and like irrigation tips. But pretty much I'm like a self-taught
Hmm. Hmm.
self-taught grower, and um, self-taught in terms of like how to produce batches of plants and things. Um, yeah, I just learn as I go along. Yeah.
And have you picked up any like tips and tricks from running your own nursery that you think amateur growers could potentially tap into as well to make their lives easier?
I think like um, even with perennials, like sowing little like well in terms of a nursery, like so small and often. Otherwise, you end up with like massive gluts of plants. That's one of the, because I do things mostly mail order. That's one of the biggest logistical problems is that you sell a plant, it can take several weeks to send it out. In the meantime, it's grown 2 feet, and then you can't fit it in the box. And it's like, how do other people deal with this problem? But other nurseries actually send out, because a lot of the plants are like herbaceous perennials, they'll send them out in the winter when the plants are dormant. So you're talking with a small, just the root, sending out the roots basically. Whereas I madly try and send out 2 meter tall Rudbeckia plants in giant boxes, because I actually when the person receives the plant at the other end, I want them to receive this like well loved, beautiful specimen, which doesn't make any commercial sense whatsoever. But that's the feedback I get, is that the plants are amazing and vital, and that's why people come back for them again and again, because they know how well nurtured they've been, and how well looked after they've been. So
I have this vision of them opening the box and this giant shaggy monster of a plant like jumping into their lap and knocking them over and licking them all over the face.
I know, I mean, it's just ridiculous, the things I've sent out, like purple tree collards, which they can grow to 3 meters tall in the ground. But like some of the plants that I've sent out that I haven't charged enough, end up being like massive specimens that you have to create ridiculous cardboard like sewn together boxes, just trying to get this massive collard out to somebody, and then you just put your head in your hands and go, what am I doing? What am I doing?
Oh, the final question I always ask people, if you could wave a magic wand and create a new crop or transform an old one, what would you wish into the world if there was like no barriers?
God, it's so hard. I mean,
Give me multiple
uh,
answers. You've worked with so many interesting things.
I'd say like going back to skirrets, like some really brightly coloured, big, fat, rooted skirrets would be good. Like, so you'd be digging up a big bunch of parsnips instead of
Mm,
pencil-sized roots. But also maybe a like a perennial pea or bean that would just you could just crop all year
mm.
round, and it keep producing keep producing pods for you to pick. I mean, there's so many. Um, it's really, really hard to choose. But like the perennial kales and things, they're sort of like one of my first loves, and they ultimately have a lifespan. I think my oldest one is 15 years old, but that's like pushing it. So maybe a brassica that could just live forever would be really nice.
I love it. I love all those answers. So, wrapping up, where can people learn more about your work? Like, what kind of links? Where would you send people to find out more about you?
Well, on my website, which is incrediblevegetables.co.uk, there's some information on there. I wish I had time to like populate it with more in-depth information. And half of what I grow is not on the website, but a lot of what I grow is on there. And then I try and post um, YouTube videos of to give a sense of the kind of spaces that I'm growing and what I'm passionate about. And also I'm on Instagram, and I try and post updates on there um, as often as I can with you know various insights into what I'm up to. This that side of it is when you're trying to work with the plants, you can't always do everything to the. I mean, I would really want to write a book as well, but I need to run away to a desert island somewhere to do that. For a year to be able to concentrate
It
on
would have to be a really dry desert island, or you would find perennial vegetables growing there to
that.
distract you, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay, look at that. Look, that's an interesting leaf over there. That's edible.
So I'll put all those links in the show notes so it's easy for people to find. And I just want to say thank you. This has been a joyous, wonderful conversation, and I'm so enchanted by the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. It's so nice to talk about it because it's especially to somebody who's so passionate about working with plants, and just to try and share what the life is like trying to do this stuff.
And spreading the bug, getting more people involved, because we all
Yeah,
have to, it's all hands on deck for food security in the future.
yeah, definitely. Thank you so much.
Recombination Nation explores how cultural and biological experimentation can lead us to a post industrial future, one that is more interesting and plausible than either Star Trek or Mad Max. If you want to support my work, sign up to my Substack, where you can read free weekly updates from my experimental farm, book reviews, and deep dives. A paid subscription gives you access to the audiobook of Taming the Apocalypse, a bold survey of the hidden domestication potential across the entire tree of life, plus my archive of over 150 past posts.